Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. If you don't know what the previous 11 parts of this Gibborim series are about, go back and learn about what it is to be mighty, because Gibborim is basically super awesome, fantastically, wonderfully weathered, aged, cracked, weary, exhausted, fatigued, battle-stricken, despairing, hopelessly devastated, and miserable people who become suddenly spectacularly more than anything anybody ever thought maybe they were capable of until they were tested. This series is really about testing humans because humans are a particularly odd breed. If you have never worked with other animals, they're different. Fundamentally, we're not another animal. We're distinctly set apart. We bear a different kind of image, an actually different image. We don't really look at idols as much on the frequent regs basis the way we think we used to. Other people back in the long yonder times, when somebody mentioned images, they had some things pop into their head that are different than ours. We see so many different images all the time that bombard our mind. We see hundreds of millions of other images on a regular basis. If you stare at this black mirror long enough, which most of you probably do because you're watching this video, you've seen a lot of images in your life, and those things showed you a reflection or a captured moment that portrayed something to you that you were able to identify quickly. Back in the long time ago, before black mirrors were on everybody's pocket or on their face, this was where it came from, or like old-fashioned carved images like coins, idols, actual idols that people looked at, that image of something that they once saw before with their eyes that they are trying to remember. And so they carve something to look like it, to remind them of it, or to just capture the moment, because you had to be good with whittling in order to capture a moment pretty well. My wife, she likes to whittle spoons. She's good too. She's better than she thinks she is, which is fantastic. But she's got this little tiny twisted spoon. Oh, I got to find that. Maybe she'll find it for me. It's nearby. There's a twisted pine that we found one time when we were up in the mountains. This was when we first kind of came into wanting to just go off and bug out into the wilderness. Any of you ever kind of like had that dream or that bucket list moment of your life where you're like, I'm going to unplug from the rat race and run away into the forest and just live? It's a good dream. It's a fantastic dream. I highly recommend it. Oh, she's hunting. Yes. She found it. Check this thing out, man. Look at this. My wife whittled a spoon. She's mighty. You see, I have a Gibborim for a wife, which is fantastic. You ought to enlist yourself in the services of one. Nourish and flourish. But she made this. Let's see if I can capture it. I'll go slow. She made this. Look at that. See what that is? Twisted pines. Sirens in the background. That's never a good sign. But this came from a tree that was probably at 10,000 feet of elevation above the sea level, which is fantastic. We were sleeping up there in the forest because we'd really gotten into that. And we discovered that going off into the mountains, what you really needed was food, water, shelter, really a place to pee and poop. I talked about that in part 11, so if you want to learn more about that, that's super critically important. And, of course, just a fun, fantastic view, because those became really more important to me. I also really am obsessed with spring water, so I always like that. But she found this along the way and figured out and saw in her mind a spoon ready to be fashioned. What I saw was a stick, which maybe I could sharpen into a spear, because most boys out there, when they see a stick, they tend to think spear or a staff, or maybe a hiking stick. But my wife, she sees spoons. She sees practical things. We feed babies with these now. We did not foresee that then. If you didn't know about it, my wife and I were definitely not able to conceive until the Father of Life actually opened my wife's barren womb. And that was a testimony unto himself. Like, there's a whole big vein that we spent watching go around our friend circle and sphere at the time of, like, we all got baby hungry. Not all of us. Some of us got super baby hungry. And some of those women got to such an extent of baby hungriness that they were willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to try to have a baby artificially made for them in a lab and then put back inside their body. I'm not saying that's wrong. There's actually a huge need for adoptions of all the babies that are inside cryogenesis freeze chambers, because people made babies and then just left them in a meat locker for a long time. Those babies need to be adopted and raised or given a chance to life too, right? Anyways, side note. That being said, We now have children, which she feeds spoons to. You know what I can't feed my child with? A blade. I can't. This is a fantastic blade. This is somewhat a broski of the blades out there. Yes, a brother of the blade. You know how to get my attention better than about anything in the history of my known life? Send me a blade and a coded message. That's basically my favorite human. True story. That's fantastic. You know who you are, but look at this beautiful gemsty. Let's see if I can. Look at that. Come on, you got to be able to respect someone's blade craft when they crank that out of a stone they find in the earth. When's the last time you made a stone into something that was versatile and useful? I don't do that very often, but my wife apparently can do it with sticks. I'm still learning to do it with rocks. Go check out Nature Nate if you don't know what I'm all about with rocks. This is a fossil. This is a fossil I found in a spring of water. That was my dream in my life. This is a mammoth bone, by the way. I'm 84% certain because I asked a good friend of mine, another broski, who is a geologist. And I'm pretty sure this is a mammoth bone. It was found in an area where a mammoth had been found prior to. So I think that's pretty supportable. I also think I found a Triceratops horn core. That's pretty absolutely outrageously epic. But I may not show that to you guys for a long time because it's like one of my secret treasures. That being said, I'm realizing there's a lot of fundamentally fantastic things about going out into the wilderness that we learn only because we actually went out into the wilderness with our backpacks and actually tried to just see what it'd be like if we bugged out for a while. And you know what we discovered? Time doesn't exist in the mountains. I actually mean that. The time that you know, the time that is set in such a way that you can keep a watch to it with an atomic precision. I grew up in a place for the last 10 years. I didn't grow up there, but I grew up there in a sense, where they actually, the timekeeper of the known system of the world, he makes his nest there. I think this is probably where a dragon makes his nest. It's called NIST, N-I-S-T, the National Institute of Strategic Sciences and Technologies. Oof. Anyways, it's another national system, but this is literally where the timekeeper of the world is. And so, like Greenwich, Green Standard, Greenwich Time, and all these places in geological and geographical history of where time has been kept from. One of those is currently planted in Boulder, which is a really interesting place. It pulses out a frequency from a kind of nuclear-powered clock. Yeah, it's a real base level. But anyways, they keep time there. And it was the center for where all the world's atomic clocks are set off of that standard. So because of that, you learn all of the cities and civilizations, and like the cities of Babylon, they run off that clock. They literally it runs time, which is a spiritual place in a very real way. Because if you set the time for the world, you may be capable of changing times and seasons from there. That's just some food for thought for those of you that are chewing on the meat of Revelation lately. Go dig into that one. Okay, so just think about that. If you didn't know, like, there was a literal enthronement of Satan's throne at the Invesco Field, which is Broncos Stadium, by Barack Hussein Obama. Did a very interesting thing where he rebuilt the throne of Pergamon from, I believe it's actually technically in Germany now, but it was originally not there. It was in Pergamon, which is literally where one of the letters to the churches, it says, "Behold the throne of Satan," right? It's literally the town where Satan is at that time. I don't know that he always stays there. It's a different thing. The dragon moves. He's tended known to do that because serpents are subtle and crafty. See, there's one over my shoulder. But the hand that pierces them is fantastic, and it can redeem each and every one of us out of those time systems of total debased debauchery and lies. Because there's no timekeeper in the mountains. It's true. If you go into the mountains and you take off your watch, you know what time it is? Whatever the heck it looks like outside currently. That's it. And it's never the same. Because in the mountains, it can be absolutely beautiful and stunning and the most incredible views and temperatures you've ever seen in your life. And within a matter of minutes, it can be the worst case scenario for you to just stay alive in. The mountains like eat your soul when it comes to your softness. They know it. They know it. They can crush you with their elemental power. It's formidable. It's also absolutely the most invigorating, revitalizing experiences if you're willing to get so uncomfortable that you're living inside the earth. Because in the mountains, generally one of the places you need to run to when you're on the wilderness is caves. Caves become that secret place in the mountains that if you don't know about it, the cave can literally just be 5 feet from you and you had no idea it was there. You could live there for a while and never know there was a cave. I've gone to chunks of property around the country where people who lived there had never once been, because they just don't smell the same way I do. Like, actually, I've got a pretty prolific sniffer. Those of you out there who've always been able to detect things in the air that others can't know what I'm talking about. And one of them is cool air that's moist. In a dry desert climate, that's super knowable smell. It's a very distinct smell, and it generally means there's open earth somewhere nearby that's got a cooler climate that I want to be inside immediately. Because of that, I've just hunted caves every chance I get, which is where sometimes people find treasures like this blade. That being said, when we go into the mountains up there, my wife and I soon learned that we tried to bring our own shelters and things like that, but a cave provided the best kind of scenario ever. To me, I like that kind of almost borderline claustrophobic feel of, at any given moment, there's only one in way and one out. And that's great. If you're a defender in a cave, you have every bit of the tactical high ground because, first of all, you're already inside it. Second of all, there's generally one main entrance that most humans are going to use, so that becomes a very formidably easy to defend position. I mean, you're really susceptible to fire, let's be real. Fire and smoke is a bad day for you because that tends to be how you kill humans inside caves if you don't have anything better to do. But we're going to be reading about today the Biblios right here. If you didn't know about it, this is the Sword of Awesomeness. I refer to it like that because most of you just think of this as a book, but it's not. It's a living history that teaches you about how you yourself can survive the schemes of all those false images that are out there. Because all those images that you've seen since you were born, most of them are total nonsense, garbage, lies that are designed to just ensnare you and lead you into the dragon's mouthpiece. And it will. But you know what doesn't? The mountains. This is why you got to get up in there. So today we're going to jump in to David on the run in the wilderness once again. Catch up with us if you haven't. We're learning about mighty men. David, super mighty. But you're about to learn the mightiest tool of all in David's playbook is restraint. It's called meekness. That's the biblical word for it. It's power under control. This is kind of like the idea of like, most people have not been around horses enough to actually get the reference of like a bit in the mouth of a horse. These are massive animals. My daughter and I were petting horses recently because I want to pet a horse every single time I see one, even if they're mean and angry. I think a horse just tells you about your soul more than most animals or humans ever could. So we were petting a horse, and this horse just moved its head a little bit, like just enough to go like that. And it almost pushed me completely off the fence post I was standing on. They're incredibly strong, outrageously strong. When they're committed to something, they're the worst case scenario coming towards you at full speed, like 35 miles an hour into your throat piece. Bad news bears. But a little tiny chunk of metal placed in the back of their mouth can completely turn that entire massive animal in any direction. It's absolutely incredible to think. It's that ability to have some restraint within you that actually can move that unstoppable force that's kind of being directed, suddenly can stop or turn away from. And it's incredibly important, especially if you ever actually want to be a mighty man. Because at the end of the day, one of the hallmark characteristics of the bad guy, Gibborim, like everybody's like Nimrod, and he became a Gibborim. Most everybody has that in their mind. They don't think of Gideon or David. They don't think as much of like Jesse. Samuel was a hoss when it came to being mighty. Dude prophesied so intensely people took their clothes off and ran away from him. That's pretty powerful mightiness. That's a different kind of gift, right? I don't know if I've ever preached a sermon and people's clothes came off. And not for those reasons. Terrible. Anyways, that was moderately uncomfortable. But because of that, David is on the prowl in the wilderness, and he is in a place where he is going to have to demonstrate some of the most important characteristics that we will see in him. Let's jump in, shall we? This is 1 Samuel 24. Now when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, saying, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. He came to the sheepfolds on the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. Okay, why, first of all, is David and his broskies in a cave right now? Okay, it says that David, he came to the sheepfolds here. Saul came to the sheepfolds. Don't forget David's primary experience in life has been what? Just quick check. He was a shepherd, right? Shepherds were all up in the mountains all the time. They're up and down in pasture lands. I saw shepherds in Afghanistan that drove livestock through the major heart of the city, which was unbelievable and definitely one of those paradigm shifting moments in your life. But then they would drive them to different pastures. They would move these things all over the place. Shepherds get around is what that means. And that means they're comfortable getting around in all kinds of environments. A shepherd can literally pick up one day and sleep in the most angelically beautiful pasture next to a stream and a brook, and the next day be barrenly stuck on the crags of a mountain just trying to survive because a windstorm blew in. And you know what wind can bring in the mountains? Lightning, which kills your sheep most hastily. So you've got to learn places to retreat to when you're up in those places. And because of that, David knows where caves are. David is awesome. He's climbed back into the back side of this cave. Inner recesses. I'm not thinking that this cave goes back for miles. Do you know what I mean? Because generally when you go to take a leak in a cave, you don't go back a couple hundred yards because you can't see in a cave without fire. Remember, we think of these things in 21st century cave technology where we have spelunking helmets and flashlights. If you didn't know it, I always recommend very good flashlights like this one. That was incredibly dull because it's on a low setting. Don't worry. This is a Nightcore PG12T. No, P12. Sorry, GT. It has a tail cap. I use this when I explore caves. Really. They didn't have that then. So when people wanted to go take a pee, they definitely just went in about as far as they could see. And here's this beautiful thing that happens when you hunt humans. I mean, when you hunt humans or whatever else you're hunting in a cave. Saul, in his mind, cannot see very far because he's coming out from the outside bright sun into a very dark place. And because of that, David and his defenders, remember, David is with his Gibborim mighty men. They can see very good. Because in about anywhere from 9 to 15 minutes, depending on your body's natural capabilities and your chutzpah, your urge to do so, you can change your ability from seeing in daylight to nightlight, like pretty quickly. It's incredible. This is why the old pirates are being depicted all the time as wearing a patch over their eye. That was just practically good wisdom in many sense of the word, that when you go up on the top of a ship, it's super bright, and suddenly you need to go in those dark bowels of the beast down below. You can flip that patch over, and then the one eye that's been in darkness can see almost immediately at full night vision capabilities, which gives you a serious tactical advantage to not hit your face on the lumber that's everywhere. Really. Same thing for caves, right? You don't want to hit your face on something like a giant rock that you can't see because it's black. Well, David and his homies are hiding up in that cave, and because of that, they have a serious tactical advantage here. Meaning, here comes the guy who said every single day, remember, Saul is thinking of ways to murder David. Every single day of his life, it says, at the latter years of Saul's life, he just wakes up and thinks about, how do I murder David? The shepherd boy, the son of Jesse, that man who's been slaying his tens thousands. That guy. Let's jump back into the story, though, before I get ahead of myself. The men of David, this is the Gibborim, said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which Yahweh said to you, Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. So he said to his men, "Far be it from me, because of Yahweh, that I should do this thing to my Lord, Yahweh's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is Yahweh's anointed." David persuaded his men with these words, and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. And Saul arose, left the cave, and went on his way. This is unbelievable restraint. If you've ever had your enemy actually handed to you, I mean, you couldn't have imagined a better case scenario when it comes to sneakily assassinating the very person who's been spending their whole day and night finding ways to try to murder you, and your wives or children. Remember, this drove families onto the run. And so David is in this tiny little cave with the guys who will slay giants and hundreds of humans with tools like a rock. We're going to meet guys that followed David because David slew humans, super tanks with rocks. These guys are serious studs, and they just got handed their prime, in their minds, the enemy, right? David looks at King Saul for a minute in the same lens piece that his mighty men did, which was as his absolute enemy. He was the incarnate bad guy in the story, right? And yet David gives into that for a while. And because of that, David does something which takes so much spectacular tradecraft to do. Most people read this part of the story like, oh yeah, and then he snuck up to him and cut his robe off. Okay, I've snuck up on people all the way up to them, into their innermost closeness. Like, we always call it kissing close, okay? That's a region of space that definitely requires breath exchange. You can feel someone breathing on you. It takes a lot of training, discipline, and intentional focused like control of your body to physically move quietly. You don't think about it a lot because you wear clothing that's probably just obnoxiously loud all the time, and you don't even recognize how loud your clothing is. It comes down to even choosing what kind of footwear. Like, you spend a lot of time thinking about shoes when you want to sneak on people. There's another serious bit of like tradecraft that comes to shoes on different kinds of environmental textures that will give up your position and make you die unnecessarily. So because of that, when I read that story and Saul is in there going to the bathroom, I don't think it was super loud. Caves have this unbelievable ability to magnify sound. The sound bounces off and reverberates off of all the directions. So it's omnidirectional echo chamber. All the sound of every little noise that you make is amplified. And given the fact that when you're going potty in a cave, you tend to hear anything else other than you going potty in the cave kind of sounds. So for David to actually sneak up on Saul in that moment with a very sharp knife, okay, I'm guessing it wasn't quite so tiny. I'm guessing it was moderately larger because he had to then take Saul's robe and cut a piece off of it without the guy noticing. This is, okay, when you go into like upper echelon levels of kind of training moments in your life for testing, that's like way up there on the list of then you won because you didn't kill your instructor, right? But it's like when the apprentice does one of those kind of moves to his master. It's so outrageously good. Everybody knows you're the man. You're the absolute studly. Like, without question, you're the Gibborim in the room because it takes so much stealth and intentionality and commitment to be able to sneak up like that. And then to not take the same blade, you see, and use that same very sharp cutting edge to totally end the life of the individual you're using the restraint with. It's like handing your enemy the back of the blade when you could have handed him the pointy bit instead. That's so much discipline in David to do that. And then he still afterwards felt convicted enough by that he had actually transgressed, because David recognized that he was, like Saul, a man under authority. And he still, even amidst this situation, he recognized his authority was not to the master who was in the room. It was to the creator of the cave that sheltered the kings of Israel. Because these are some of the last moments you're going to see David and Saul, who will be the kings of Israel. When forever people think of the kings of Israel, there's the first one, there's the second one, in a cave together at one moment in time. And yet David does the one thing which, for all intents and purposes, nobody thinks he's super mighty for doing. But to me, this is so much more of a mighty moment than David and Goliath. Because David has his buddies here. David has the prime opportunity. He has every single reason and excuse to justify, to make a just kill. Right now, he's got all of that in his court. And yet, the one thing he knows he needs more than any of that is to not transgress his authority, which is the creator of the cave. He knows that Yahweh is the one who has placed the anointing oil upon the head of Saul through the hand of Samuel. And that's a serious thing. If you haven't studied the first beginning portions of this book, it's super fundamentally important when you learn about the anointing oil. It's a very special oil that was used for anointing one who would bear the spirit of the living Elohim on this earth, who would be the leader of his people. It was a very powerful thing. Saul was not always the bad guy. He's not the bad guy in this story either. Saul is being utilized by the Father. He literally is being given the thoughts. He has a evil spirit sent against him to cause him to have this rage, in a sense. I think he also had a willingness in his heart and a desire to hold on to the power, which made him susceptible and vulnerable to that. That's the primary weakness of bad guys, of bad Gibborims, of bad women, and people whose character is lacking a character trait of humility, of sacrifice. Meekness is power, the most power possible, under the most restraint possible, unless it's needed to be used otherwise. Horses have that capacity where they can care for their young and yet stomp your face in if they really needed to. It's incredible. That's restraint. David had restraint. That's a mature sign of a believer. Saul did not. Saul demonstrated that when he tried to throw the spear through the face of his own son because his own son asked him a question. Remember, when children ask you a question, you want to throw a spear through the wall? You're not meek. And you need to go back to the drawing boards of your character and get stripped of all the pride that built that up in you and recognize that strength doesn't come from you. I've watched people with the most strength in the world. I've literally watched it leak out of their body because, you know what? A lot of strength doesn't stop a tiny pointy object going into your kidney and draining you of your vitality. Not even a little bit. So there's a serious need for restraint when you get your mightiness. David demonstrates that here. And because of that, he demonstrates to his king, the actual king, that he is also worthy of being entrusted with more power. Whereas Saul, well, let's see how Saul handles it, shall we? Now afterward, I'm going to try to keep this under 30 minutes because most of you have been programmed your whole life to keep everything in your life under 30 minutes. But we're going to work on that, right? Endurance. Now, afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, "My Lord, the king!" And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, 'Behold, David seeks to harm you'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that Yahweh has given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to kill you. But my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch my hand out against my Lord, for he is Yahweh's anointed. Now, my father, see the edge of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands, and I have not sinned against you, though you were lying in wait for my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between you and me, and may Yahweh avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the Proverbs of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness. But my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog? A single flea? Yahweh, therefore, be judge and decide between you and me, and may he see and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son, David?" Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt wickedly with you. You have declared today that you have done good to me, and that Yahweh delivered me into your hand, and yet you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? May Yahweh therefore reward you with good in return for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. So now swear to me by Yahweh that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. And David swore to Saul, and Saul went up to his home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. You see what that happened there? If David would have killed Saul there, what would have happened? Most likely, if David used his saucy bladecraft there to just end King Saul, and then what? Do you think bloodshed tends to beget more bloodshed? It's a serious thing. Do you remember the kind of people that were very likely to ascend in Saul's place? The kinds of sons? Jonathan, probably not, right? Jonathan is very likely not going to be the son Saul would pick to get the throne. There's a lot of guys in Saul's camp who are the conspirators, remember? Because conspiracies happen constantly, all the time, especially when you're going for power grabs. And remember, the worst guy in the history of known time? Oh, what was his name? I'm missing it. He was Ahimelech. Doeg the Edomite. Go back to those videos. Doeg the Edomite, right? The guy who conspired and gave up David. By doing so, he slaughtered a bunch of priests and their families and their children and their livestock and their animals. That's like the other guy who's trying to grab power in Saul's camp. Do you think that guy is just going to let David take the throne? Or do you think that guy wants to hold the power because he knows his days are probably done once David takes the throne? There's a lot of people out there that'll try to keep their power. If David instead does the one thing that David, the son of David, the king of David, Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah, he advocated that we do something different with our enemies, which was to have mercy on them. In all of this stealthy tradecraft, you know when they never taught me how to weaponize? Mercy. Mercy was one of those things that they bred strategically and beat out of me throughout the course of my life. They calloused up those feelings and they burned and cauterized the nerve endings of mercy and compassion in that area of my soul. And because of that, you know what it never taught me? The gift David just learned. David just learned one of the most powerful lessons he can ever have for the rest of his life, which is by doing good to those who are your evil enemies. If you do good to those who harm you, if you bless those who curse you, if you do good to those who harm you and despitefully use you and say kind of evil things about you, it really does put heaping coals on their head. If you've ever grabbed a coal out of a fire, I've tried to do that. I got totally brainwashed, I think, by a movie with Tim Allen and Mimi Siku, Jungle to Jungle. And they'd had this men's rite of passage kind of moment in there. And, when you're a teenager and you just want to be a man. And they had this thing where they grabbed a burning stick out of the fire and put their hand out on it. And I was like, wow, that's savage. And I always thought that would just be relentlessly savage. And so I would sometimes try that a little bit, and it just never looked as cool when it was in real life. But because of that, there's definitely no way that people are going to learn mercy in a culture where everybody's just killing each other to the top. But David does. David learned that even amidst a camp full of massively powerful and ready to tear people's throats out mighty men, David restrains them. A lot of those guys were probably serious criminals in the cave with him. Because of that, he had to persuade those men also to not just murder Saul. And it takes a mighty leader to be able to hold his men back, which shows that meekness is infectious. Meekness is something that is infectious from a leader, but so is bloodthirst and bloodlust. And Saul's camp is riddled with bloodlust right now, but David's camp is being percolated with mercy. He's changing the lives of the men around him. He's persuading them to learn that the power under control is far more effective tool against your enemies than it would ever be to just kill more of them, because it doesn't come back the same way. David instead gets his own enemy to repent. That is so powerful, because the ultimate goal at the end of it, of all of this, is to bear up better fruit. And the fruit comes through repentance, from causing those who are on a path of destruction to turn and to become set apart and used for something useful, right? My wife saw this stick on the ground that was going to rot and decay and turn into nothing but soil. Wonderful soil. But you know what it did instead? She saw it for what it could be. And she set it apart for a different use. She changed its nature. She used the gift of creation that she has been given by her Creator, which is expressing through a blade something that this could have been set apart for by the Creator himself. She changed its purpose. She gave it a new identity. And because of that, here, years later, it's still in... I don't have a lot of things in my house. I live in an RV that picks up and moves like gypsies in the wind is the way I like to refer to it. Because of that, I have limited space. But this thing was one of those items that had to come with us. And now this is one of those things that feeds children in my life, which is amazing. But because of that, I've got to see the way that she can transform something that I would have never seen looking like that into something spectacular. Yahweh has that same vision for different people out there, and especially for our enemies. And when we actually start to pray forgiveness for the people that harm us or abuse us, and then it starts to transform our heart to where we can have love and mercy and compassion for those who seek our harm, it really does burn those people. It will burn them. It will ultimately burn them all the way to their ultimate destruction, where they're burned like chaff, or it will cause them to be so convicted by it that they turn and they become set apart for a good purpose. And that should be each and every one of our goals. And I hope that you take courage from seeing someone who, as mighty as he was, he could have slung a stone and crushed Saul's head from that cave. He could have cut his head off. Quite seriously, we know he's done both those things. And yet he chose instead to have restraint. Be restrained with your mightiness. And I assure you of this, it will be far more powerful than any other tool you've ever picked up in your life. Have mercy on your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Do good to those who harm you. It really does change the systems of man. So don't always look for the bad guy and the primal opportunity for you to hunt him down. Seek instead for deliverance from those that are perishing, because by doing so, it might also give you a whole new purpose in your life and a new identity. I love you. I pray you be vigilant out there. And by that, I mean, read the book of Nehemiah and learn about vigilance. Swords and spears in one hand, mortar and pestle. Nope, maybe just mortar. Some kind of tool people use to... I've never done a lot of stone wall building. Some kind of tool in order to build stuff. Do that on the regs. Be a guy on the wall. And if you don't have anybody else on the wall, well, you know what? Go find a rock and turn it into something fantastic today. I love you. Be vigilant. Be safe out there. And by that I mean live as dangerously as possible. Strategically, every single day of your life, because the days are evil, but you were born for such a time as this. I love you.